Good evening. I'm calling the Camarillo Planning Commission meeting of Tuesday, October 3rd, 2023 to order. Can we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Murphy.
Here.
Commissioner Lamone.
Present.
Vice Chair Edsel.
Here.
Chair Vandermeulen.
Here. Thank you. And then I'll turn to Vice Chair Etzel for pledge.
Please stand and your hand over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sorry. Okay, now it's better. Thank you. Next item is the consent item with our minutes from our last meeting of September 19th. Did anybody find any corrections or concerns? I didn't see any.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, please vote. Okay, and that passes. Thank you. Okay, next we have public comments. I'll open public comments. Do we have any public comments on items, non-agenda items? Okay, then we are closing public comments. So next we go to our public hearings, and the first item is the Airport North Specific Plan Amendment. Can we have a staff report, please?
Yes, this presentation will be made by our senior planner, Paul McLaren.
Good evening, Chair Vandermeulen, Commissioners. I'm bringing before you tonight General Plan Amendment 2019-1, Specific Plan Amendment to the Airport North Specific Plan, and a change of Zone 335. And this includes an addendum to the subsequent EIR that was done back in, it was adopted back in 2016. So the request is from Dennis Hardgrave, representing Springville, RIC Springville LLC, and they are requesting to have a general plan amendment to change the land use designation of 26.1 acres from commercial to industrial, do a corresponding amendment to the Airport North Specific Plan to be consistent with that general plan amendment, and to change the zone change 335 to change the 26.1 acres from commercial to limited manufacturing to be consistent with the general plan amendment. So the project location, formerly most people know it as the Selig property. It is just west of Springville Drive and north of the airport, south of the 101 freeway, and is located in the Airport North Specific Plan. So in September of 2016, the City Council approved a General Plan Amendment 2014-2, which changed 26.1 acres of the 48-acre lot to commercial, and did a corresponding amendment to the Airport North Specific Plan. And they also changed the zone for that 26.1 acres from LM to CPD. And they did, at that time, a subsequent final EIR, which was EIR number 2014-08. At the time of this general plan amendment, the developer entered into an agreement with the city to find a regional destination retailer, which would be like a Bass Pro Shop or an IKEA or something along those lines, for the commercial lot within a year. After a year, the city could revert the land back to industrial uses or back to what was existing prior to the GPA. But eventually, there was an adoption of an extension of 5 years to that agreement. So as it stands now, this is the existing land use for that property. So it's got the large 26.1 acre section on the upper left, and then there's a little bit more commercial along Ventura Boulevard in Springville, and then the remainder of it is still research and development, industrial uses, and the zoning is corresponding to LM and commercial plan development. Within the Airport North Specific Plan, it was modified also to match the general plan amendment and the zoning. So you see most of it is actually commercial, and then there's some leftover research and development, and that's as it exists today. So then in January of 2019, the City Council referred this general plan amendment 2019-1 for further study. The intent at the time was to reduce the commercial from 26.1 acres to 3 acres, with the remaining as limited manufacturing and a corresponding specific plan amendment and change of zone. At the triennial review of GPA 2019, the applicant requested that the city revert the land use specific plan and zoning back to the previously existing, so go back to what it had been prior to 2016, because Bass Pro Shop wasn't biting and IKEA didn't find it to be a field of dreams. So they are now asking, they feel that the market is going to be more appropriate to industrial. And so they are asking to revert it back to the completely, all 48.88 acres or 46.88 acres goes back to industrial research and development and a zoning of limited manufacturing. They're also proposing that we would have to amend, of course, the Airport North specific plan to make the entire area, again, research and development. We did have this general plan amendment on September 8th, did go before the Airport Land Use Committee, and they found it to be consistent with the Airport Land Use Plan as well. So the environmental background on this project is a subsequent environmental impact report was prepared back in 2014 and adopted in 2016. And we have had an addendum to that EIR, a subsequent EIR prepared for this project, and has been found that that there's no substantial change occurring or major revisions to the adopted subsequent EIR, so the project will not result in any new or more severe impacts, and the mitigation measures remain valid. The City of Camarillo has adopted community goals to identify areas of concern for future development within the city. Our analysis, staff's analysis, demonstrates that the project complies with the community goals because the future development, any development, because none is proposed with this project at the time, is going to have to go through the city's design regulations and process to ensure that the community character is preserved, to include heritage zone. Projects will be walkable, circulation will be enhanced, and reversion to the pre-2016 land use and zoning doesn't impact the city's ratio of commercial to industrial. And commercial and industrial to housing, because no housing is proposed or has ever been proposed. And so therefore, it's not going to impact the ability to meet housing needs in the most recent RENA updates. It's not going to increase demand on park facilities or recreational facilities or schools, and it will or result in an increase in residential growth beyond what's already been anticipated for that property. We also evaluated the general plan element consistency. The site is infill, and so it would not expand the curb. The proposed changes promotes industrial park concepts, and it's consistent with the airport land use plan. The proposed changes won't alter existing traffic patterns. It's not providing any new housing, but it will be providing industrial jobs supporting the community's residents. The proposed project is already served by law enforcement and fire departments and is not in any hazard zone. The existing contour noise equivalency levels for the property are actually more suited to industrial than commercial, because we're already experiencing an average of about 70 decibels on that property. And open space, the site is into prime agricultural land. It's been fallow since 2008, and it's not subject to a Williamson Act, and it has no known natural resources. The city has adopted the Economic Development Strategic Plan back in 2018, which identifies the city's goals, economic goals, and its strategy to achieve those. It places a high priority on positioning Camarillo as a place for tech-oriented entrepreneurial development. The proposed changes align with that plan by creating an LM zone with the land use as industrial for research and development. And these changes would open the door for development on an underutilized vacant site. And again, that's going to go with kind of what the applicant is telling us when it comes to the market, is that industrial is more appropriate to the current market right now. So the recommended action would be to adopt a resolution recommending to City Council approval of an addendum to the subsequent EIR, adopt a resolution recommending approval to the City Council for a general plan amendment 2019-1 to change the land use element designation from general commercial to industrial for 26.1 acres, adopt a resolution recommending approval to the City Council of an amendment to the airport-specific plan to change the land use designation from general commercial to industrial for 26.1 acres, and adopt a resolution recommending approval to the City Council of a change of zone 335 to change the zoning designation of 26.1 acres from commercial plan development to limited manufacturing. And that ends my presentation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any questions for staff? No?
Yes, maybe a couple. Just to confirm, the proposal is to bring this property back to where it was prior to 2014?
Yes, that is correct.
All right, and so the EIR document will be the subsequent EIR plus this addendum, which I believe doesn't change anything from the subsequent EIR. Is that correct?
That is correct. And then any follow-on development that occurs on the property where it's actually construction will undergo its own environmental review.
Okay, that's good. Thanks.
I know you mentioned that this hadn't been considered for housing before. Would it be too close to the airport to be considered for housing?
It is not consistent with that would probably be found by the Airport Land Use Commission to not be consistent with the airport land use plan.
Okay. I didn't think it would be, but I
Yeah,
thought I'd ask.
It's a matter of structural coverage and density. You're not allowed to have a certain amount of structural coverage within certain areas of around the airport because of hazard to life if there were plane crashes or whatever, like something like that.
And if I remember from maybe, I think one of the other projects or something, there's also a height that it has to be shorter, closer to the airport.
That is
I
correct.
think we had one building that increased in height as it moved away from.
Yeah, there's a 7-to-1 slope ratio as you leave from the fence on the north side of the airport property. It's a 7-to-1 slope ratio. So that's where the heights would be limited on any projects that would occur on this property as well.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have any other questions. Okay. Then we will open this for public comment. And do we have the applicant present?
Same person.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission and staff. I'm Dennis Hardgrave, representing the ownership group. And first of all, thank you for hearing this out. This is a procedural matter, as you can probably tell from the staff report, very thoroughly presented by staff with the history and timelines. My history with this project goes back to the approval of the Airport North specific plan. I can say kind of sheepishly at this point, but we've worked over the years to implement different phases of the project, and the agreement, as you know, has expired technically that was put in place. It was a good faith effort by the Selleck Group to attract a destination retailer. As we all know, there's been a massive shift in the retail center market and the environment between online and in-person and since 2016. So there is no horizon view on which there would ever be a large destination retailer come here. We started this with the City Council some time ago. They recommended the referral and the reversion. As we looked at it more closely with your staff, the community development staff did a good job of sorting through it and determining we not only had to do a reversion document, but we actually had to do this exercise that staff has gone through with their outside CEQA consultant. So it's become a little more complicated than we all intended at first, but this is, I'd say, the next to the last step. The City Council will be the last step in actually moving this property back to where we can do the long-term intended and economically viable uses on it. I do agree that the city economic development goals are met by this reversion, and on behalf of the owner, concur with both the CEQA findings that are in the document and the staff recommendations. Other than that, I'm here for questions and look forward to moving forward with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? I have one. Is this going to be open to a variety of different sizes of industrial, like maybe from small condos to large, or is it going to be more medium to large for research and development? uses?
That's not determined as of yet, so we really have to get through this step, and it would be premature to make any, speculation on it. It won't be enormous box distribution, we know that. That's very
Right.
clear to everybody. But, there'll be a range of user types quite likely. And
Okay.
That's what the market is. When we hear from the brokerage community, they tell us there is a range that exists right now.
And I know we've had several that are coming up, just smaller units that are being built and coming online.
Right.
So I didn't know if there's going to still be more of those needed in that area or not.
It's hard to tell, and so that'll probably work itself out as the market evaluates what's there. There may be divisible buildings that sometimes meets some of that need, and I think there's some uncertainty just because of the financing market and interest rates right now on how things proceed, but it is definite that the need and the city's desire in terms of economic development is to create jobs and revenue generators. So that's the focus I'm certain that,
Right.
that the property owners will have.
And that fits in what we're trying to do as a city to build that job base.
Correct. Yeah, it's a great location too,
It is.
obviously.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so, and we don't have any other public cards or comments? Okay. Then I will close the public hearing, and we can move on to,
Yeah, when I went through the package, it seemed like kind of a confusing thing. I was trying to figure out what was going on, so your presentation and Dennis was very helpful. It seems real straightforward now, and we're just reverting back, so thank you.
and I know somehow I remember discussions on this a couple years ago, at least since I've been on the planning commission, so it's like, I must have been listening to the city council discussing it at some point. So it just makes sense to take it back to where it was to me. So, any other comments?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the presentations by Paul and Dennis as well. When I was reading through that, I couldn't help but think, why are we doing this when we're just jumping back to where it was before? But based on your input tonight, I understand and appreciate that it's out of procedural necessity that we go through all of this. So thank you for that.
Okay. No other comments?
Call for a resolution?
Okay, so we have 4 resolutions before the Planning Commission on this item, and I'll take them one at a time.
Okay.
So resolution number PC 2023-22, a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Camarillo recommending the approval of an addendum to the final subsequent environmental impact report 2014-08 for general land plan amendment 2019-1, airport North Pacific Plan amendment and change of zone.
I'll make a motion to waive further reading and vote for adoption.
I'll second.
Please vote. That passed unanimously.
Okay, so the second resolution is resolution number PC 2023-23, a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Camarillo recommending approval of a request by Dennis Hargrave for Rick LLC for an approval of an amendment to the land use element of the general plan involving approximately 26 acres for the described as General Plan Amendment 2019-01.
Move to waive further reading and vote to adopt.
I'll second that.
Okay. Please vote. And that passes unanimously.
Okay, the third resolution tonight is resolution number PC 2023-24, a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Camarillo recommending approval to the City Council of a request by Dennis Hargrave of Land Development Planning Services representing Rick LLC for an amendment to the Airport North Pacific Plan.
I'll make a motion to waive further reading and vote for adoption.
Second.
Okay, please vote. That also passes unanimously.
Okay, and then the last resolution for this item is resolution number PC 2023-25, a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Camarillo recommending approval of a request by Dennis Hargrave for Rick LLC for a change of zone from CPD Commercial Plan Development to LM Limited Manufacturing involving approximately 26 acres, further described and set forth as change of zone 335.
Might as well make another motion to waive reading and vote for adoption.
Second.
Please vote. And that passes unanimously. So with that, I think we have a change in process here. And we will go to our next item on home occupations. And could we have staff report, please?
Yes, the staff presentation will be made by our Economic Development Manager, George Winkler.
Evening, Madam Chair and Planning Commissioners. Actually, clicker always helps. So today, we're going to be chatting about, or we're considering a proposed amendment to the Camarillo Municipal Code, Chapter 19.65 for home-based businesses. Chapter 19.65, it establishes our regulations to determine if the business activity occurring in a residential structure is appropriate. It also provides the required procedures for issuing our home occupation permits in the city. Currently, we have about 991 home occupation permits in Camarillo, and we get about 122 applications each year. So why would we amend Chapter 19.65? Well, the last time it was updated is in 1990, and this is prior to AOL becoming a household name, which kind of puts it into context there. The world's changed a lot since then, and home-based businesses have also changed a lot since then. The devices to carry out business could be basically your cell phone nowadays. It could be a cell phone, a laptop, a tablet. And what our procedure calls for is it calls for a inspection of the premises of the home, and that in some cases feels like a violation to our business community of their residential structure. And ultimately, what are we really inspecting for at the end of the day when it's a home-based business? So we found that it's not a relevant task any longer and something that we should move beyond. So the two amendments that we're really seeking to do today, very light redlining of the municipal code, but the first one is to remove that mandatory code compliance inspection from our office-based home business types. So if we were to move forward with this, we would create a self-attestation for a business owner to say, I'm exclusively an office-based business, and then therefore our admin team would review that, make sure that it still complies with the zoning, and then we could issue that home occupation permit. The second item is more about equity and reducing the barriers of starting a business to somebody that lives in an apartment, because right now it requires, our municipal code requires the property owner permission for an office-based business to start in an apartment complex. So if you're thinking about starting a business and all the hurdles in your way and then trying to figure out how to get the property owner to sign off on it for a permit, once again, it's a no-impact business to the residential area, and it just creates one more hurdle. So we're taking that out as well, or would like to. So here are the three main amendments to this, and you'll see here it's very light. We're just changing the word from the director will cause to be conducted to the director may cause to be conducted. And that still allows us to inspect certain business types which may be higher risk, like say you're in construction or you have some perhaps physical storage on the property that we want to make sure is in compliance. Ultimately, we don't have any issues with this, but creating that relationship with those types of businesses has been really successful. Secondly, just changing it to if any violations exist relating to any known violations, because this means, once again, that we're not going to inspect it, but if we do know about a violation that's currently in existence, we're not going to allow the business to operate until that's fixed. Finally, this is the one item about the housing and the apartment complex. So we just added that, a language that said, we're not going to ask for that permission unless, or we will ask for it unless it's an office-based business. So basically, this amendment would bring us into alignment with our neighbors to some degree. Moore Park, Thousand Oaks, Oxnard, Ventura, they do not inspect home occupations at all. Their procedure is a zoning approval followed by permit issuance, whereas ours is a zoning approval and inspection of the residence followed by the permit issuance. So we're still retaining the right to inspect some of those more risky businesses, which still sets us apart and protects our community's character just an adequate amount to our understanding. And then, of course, the Economic Development Strategic Plan. This is in alignment with our Economic Development Strategic Plan because business services like financial services, marketing, e-commerce, legal, accounting, all those types of businesses operate in home office environments. So we want to support those high-paying jobs that provide support to our other industries locally. And then secondly, we want to improve our business environment and just changing that mentality of like, hey, the city's going to inspect my house to start a business. That's just, it's more business friendly. And it reduces the permitting time for that business, so they don't have to wait for that inspection to occur. They just get the permit pretty fast, so then they can start their business. It also reduces our staff time on it significantly, so I think it reduces our staff time by about 80%. I think we calculated it would save about 4 weeks per year of staff time, which is an incredible amount of staff power that we get back to higher priority concerns that we have here at the city. And then CEQA exemption, specifically, it's exempt from CEQA, and I'll just point to the last one because it's an administrative activity that will not result in a direct or indirect physical change to the environment. So this is staff's recommendation, and that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions here? Any questions down here?
Yeah, just one. Once the permit is issued, though, if there's a complaint from somebody, then you guys still may go inspect or can.
Absolutely, yeah. A complaint would cause an inspection by our code compliance to verify that a complaint exists. And if there is one, we would issue a letter saying, they have to correct this issue. And if not, we could revoke that home occupation permit and business license.
Okay, great, thank you.
And you mentioned, I think I read that you will check to make sure they have a business license, or are they not required to have a business license?
Yes, this is actually the first step in getting a business license. So it's kind of like we have two processes. If you're a home-based business, you start out with the home occupation permit. If you're a commercial brick and mortar, you get the zoning approval. And from there, then you get your business license. So it's the first step in getting the business license.
Okay. And then you mentioned on the apartments, they don't have to get management approval. But if it's an HOA and the HOA requires their approval to do the business in, does it have any effect on that?
No, it's a home-based business. So ultimately what happens right now is if you say, hey, we're not going to give you a permit for that, they'll still do it, and you'll never know because how would you know? So we have people that come into City Hall currently that say, hey, what do I have to do to get a business license? We let them know. They say, oh, thank you very much, and they never come back. So it's a possibility that we could have a couple thousand more business licenses in town if we had changed this procedure. So it's very true.
Okay. So it would mean if an HOA did have a requirement, it would just be to the HOA, but they wouldn't have to come get a city permit?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
I do have a question about the last section there. This isn't impacted by the changes, but there is a fee. Is this a fee for the home occupation application separate from the business license fee?
Yeah, currently there are two different fees for home occupation permits. One is for multifamily, and the second is for single-family residences. And then after that, you would get your business tax certificate. And so our city does business tax certificates instead of business licensing. So it's for revenue ultimately. So
Right.
the first year you get your permit, and then after that you're not charged like a repeat on the home occupation permit. So that just exists, and then you then pay an annual business tax certificate fee.
I'm wondering whether the city has considered also modifying the fee so that it's contingent on whether an inspection is required or not.
Yes, and that was actually, we've already prepared that information. I don't know if you were interested in that at the Planning Commission level, but we have calculated a fee for a inspection and not an inspection. And we have also calculated a new fee for when we implement OpenGov, which is our online software that should be launching in a couple of months. And it will reduce the time from like 90 minutes to about 15 minutes in most applications when we have OpenGov live. So that will reduce the fee as well.
That's great, thank you.
Okay. That it? Then we have no more questions for you. Then I'll open public comment in case do we have any interested comments on this item? I don't see any. Pardon? Public hearing, sorry. Public comments. Okay. Then we will have open and closed public hearing. Thank you. So any other comments?
Do you have a comment? Yeah, I appreciate these common sense amendments to update the code. Otherwise, they are antiquated based on today's reality, and appreciate that there's still the discretion based on the nature of the business to do the inspections. I think that's important for the public to understand that inspections will happen if deemed necessary by the staff, and appreciate so much. It's going to preserve limited city resources and also alleviate burdens on residents and provide greater accessibility. So I very much appreciate this work and the presentation, and in full support of the amendments.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. It's a lot of unnecessary home inspections that will not be taking place. And I think I heard that it could impact the number of home businesses by over 1,000 or 2,000 possibly. Those are big numbers, and that's good for the city. So I also like the inclusion of multifamily renters in the process. I think that's a business-friendly move as well. So thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a good common sense amendment as well, and it's kind of amazing how many hours in a year that the city spent at cost doing home inspections. My concern was, what about, if there were bad actors, how are you going to track those? But in the staff report and the presentation, there's still the ability to inspect if there's some sort of a complaint or something. So I'm satisfied that it's a great revision, and I support it.
Yeah. And my issue, when I first read it, also tied in with that was, what if they're bringing in too many customers, or they're causing noise or disruption in the neighborhood, or, especially if it's in an apartment area or something. And then I read down to the next section of, how they're going to monitor that, or if it is reported, then it'll be addressed. So that kind of cleared that up for me, but other than that, I think it's a great move for just people to have a business at home and have more, their income coming in, and not being worried about not being able to do it or costing too much to do it. Anything else? Okay.
Just one other comment, just to clarify for the public that this is for a home business, which is separate from people who are employed and are working from home, right? They do not require this type of license.
No, they don't require a license to just work from home if they're employed by somebody outside of, like my wife, for instance.
Thank you.
It's a great point. I hadn't thought about that
Good
one.
clarification.
Yeah, that is good.
Thank you. Was that it? Then we can
Call for a resolution.
call for resolution.
Resolution number PC 2023-26, a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Camarillo recommending approval of the City Council of an amendment to the zoning ordinance of Camarillo Municipal Code, Chapter 19.65 for home occupations.
I move to waive further reading and to adopt the resolution.
I'll second.
Okay, please vote. And that passes unanimously. Next item is Camarillo Municipal Code for medicinal cannabis.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. This is Agenda Item D. It's in response to Senate Bill 1186, and it becomes effective January 1st, 2024. The bill was passed last year. And the reason the Planning Commission is seeing it at this stage is to try to get ahead of it, so that the idea is that it can go before the City Council for first and second reading, and regulations can be in place before the bill becomes effective. So the bill itself is fairly straightforward, although it is a mouthful. So what it does is it precludes the city from prohibiting medicinal cannabis delivery businesses in the city and from establishing regulations that have the effect of prohibiting those businesses in the city. The legislation also goes into and specifically lists those regulations that it states have the effect of prohibiting medicinal cannabis in the city. And those are going to include things like the number of businesses that operate in the city, the quantities of cannabis that can be sold, the hours of operation, and physical premises from which medicinal cannabis can be sold. And kind of turning our attention now to the municipal code, the current municipal code completely prohibits physical premises for all cannabis operations, and it imposes regulations for medicinal cannabis deliveries by limiting the hours of operation. When this bill becomes effective, those provisions will conflict with the Senate bill. So that's the reasoning behind this amendment. Next slide, please. So the amendment, it does three things, really. It's going to, first of all, amend those sections by providing an exception for medicinal cannabis deliveries, physical premises, and it's also going to remove the regulations governing the hours of operations for medicinal cannabis deliveries. And that's the first bullet point you'll see there. The second bullet point is going to allow medicinal cannabis deliveries, physical premises for medicinal cannabis deliveries in the M2 general manufacturing zone. Now, these facilities, they're not typical retail facilities. These are non-storefront, meaning they're not open to the public. They're essentially last mile type of uses where cannabis will come in, orders will be received, the product will be distributed and put into a vehicle and then delivered, and then the vehicle comes back and it's rinse and repeat. And so those uses tend to be most consistent with other general manufacturing uses that are found in the M2 zone. And so it seems most appropriate to place that use in that zone. Given that it is a controlled substance, it's also appropriate to subject it to a conditional use permit for Planning Commission's review and consideration should a project come in. And that's the second bullet point. The last bullet point is establishing reasonable regulations for those physical premises. This is going to include things like odor control, advertising, making sure the products aren't visible from the street, making sure that there's proper security personnel in place. And I mean, in a nutshell, that is the proposed ordinance. The recommendation is going to be fine that it's exempt as a having no direct impact on the environment or foreseeable direct impact on the environment, and adopt a resolution recommending approval to the City Council of the ordinance. I'd be happy to answer any questions the Commission may have.
Any questions?
I have a couple. On the operation standards, number 10 limits the maximum monetary carry of $200 for delivery persons. I'm just wondering how reasonable that is. I don't know anything about this business, but would this pertain to those who would take the medicinal cannabis from the facility and deliver it to a home and then collect fees collect payment for that product, or?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Murphy. So most of the operations are actually done online, and so there isn't a physical exchange of currency. But in the event that there is a physical exchange, then the proposed regulation would limit the drivers to possessing $200 in cash, and that's for safety reasons. They don't, the idea here is that we don't want these businesses to be targets of crime, and it's also to protect the community from that as well.
Okay, not too different from pizza delivery people. And I have a question about the resolution ordinance amendment, paragraph B, on page 3 of the, I don't know if you have that can be popped up on the screen. I don't know how else to describe this. But, so in the resolution ordinance amendment, can everyone get to that page 3? I don't know if you can pop that up on the screen. I was a little confused by this paragraph. I think it's page 6 of 10 of the resolution, up at the top.
Which one, Tom?
So in the resolution, on page 6 at the top, page 6 of 10 of the resolution, there's item B, it's a sub-paragraph B.
Is it page?
Page 3 of 7, correct, at the top, sub-paragraph B. Yes, that's it. Kind of hard to read from here. That paragraph confused me a little in that it starts out that unless otherwise provided by California law, the delivery of cannabis to any person within the city limits is prohibited, and then it goes on to describe the very allowance of cannabis delivery and conditions thereof. So I was kind of confused about that, and I did get a chance to talk with Justin about this today, and he suggested that I could bring this before my fellow commissioners for discussion. My thought after looking at this paragraph is that if that first sentence is deleted, the paragraph makes a lot more sense to me. And this paragraph, I guess I should first confirm that this pertains to non-medical cannabis.
So Commissioner Murphy, if I may direct your attention to page 24 of the PDF, I think that might make things a little bit clearer. It's the red lines. And so I believe this is the provision you're referring to, subsection B.
Oh. I think he's talking about.
Right.
Okay, so the first sentence, the majority of that provision is existing language. So the city has previously had a prohibition on delivery of cannabis within the city. There is some state law that was passed a couple years ago and under the Business and Professions Code, which states that cities cannot regulate the delivery of medicinal cannabis, or strike that, of licensed retail cannabis on public roads within city jurisdiction. And so the language that we've added here, rather than essentially substitute our own judgment for the commission and for the council, is merely to provide an exemption for those uses that are complying with the California law. So the long and short of it is that if a business, a retail business, is licensed under the California Cannabis Control Board, then they are exempt from this prohibition. But if they are not licensed, then this prohibition applies. And if they're delivering cannabis within the city, any form of cannabis within the city, then they're subject to this prohibition and subject to prosecution, whether that be a misdemeanor or an infraction. And so the idea here is to preserve, kind of strike a balance between preserving the maximum control for the city while at the same time operating within the confines of the law. As you acknowledged, we did have a conversation. The commission is certainly free to propose or recommend to the city council striking that local control, but that would be for the commission's consideration.
Okay. And I was helped a lot by our conversation, and I do have a much better understanding for it. However, if I did not have that conversation and understanding, it would be a fairly confusing paragraph to me. I mean, I'm not someone that would ever use any of this, so, but I imagine there are many people in the city that will, and if they take this paragraph and try to understand it, I think it will be difficult for a lot of people, and much easier if that first sentence is just is struck out entirely. It's completely, I mean, I'm certainly open to everyone else's thoughts about that.
Just to clarify, it's the first sentence that you're referring to as lacking clarity in the full context of the paragraph?
Right. So paragraph B, unless otherwise provided by California law, the delivery of cannabis to any person within the city limits is prohibited. I mean, it's not really prohibited by the city to any person. And if you take that sentence out, it goes on to explain when permitted by state law, the businesses delivering cannabis, et cetera, and they're governed by certain hours and so forth. It all makes sense from there.
I think the one is what's being permitted, and one is being clear about what's prohibited. And just for the legality, I agree with council that first sentence is like the catch-all, right? Of like, that's the default position of the city.
Right.
And then what follows is the position of the city, the restrictions where it is permitted.
Okay.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't want to speak for you, but.
Very well summarized. Thank you.
Okay, that's all I have to say.
You have to answer any of the
Okay.
questions.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions of staff?
I think that was good discussion.
That was a good discussion. Then I will open public hearing. And do we have any questions or comment cards on this item? Okay. Then I will close public hearings. And then any additional discussions? Call for a motion or call for a resolution?
Resolution number PC 2023-27, a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Camarillo recommending approval to the City Council of an ordinance amending sections 19.55.030 and 19.32.040, and the addition of section 19.32.325 of the Camarillo Municipal Code to implement state law related to medicinal cannabis.
I move that we waive further reading and vote to adopt.
I'll second that.
Okay, please vote. And that passes unanimously. All right, then we can go on to,
Oh, I'm the next item.
okay.
Call
We will go on
security.
to our, you're welcome.
Chair, before we move on, can I make one comment just for the
Yes.
public? Again, that's just for the public's understanding that what we just passed refers only to medicinal deliveries and not to non-medicinal, just in case there's concern about that. It's still fairly narrow.
Thank you. Another important not disclaimer, but comment that needs to be made. Thank you. Okay, then we are going on to item E for Assembly Bill 2097 on parking informational update.
Yes, this presentation will be made by our senior planner, James Fowler.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Excuse me, I had a coughing attack right before my presentation, so unfortunate timing on that. I'm James Fowler, senior planner, happy to give a presentation on AB 2097. So a little bit of information on AB 27. AB 2097 is a bill already passed by the state legislature that removes some local control from the city. So formerly the city had, and still for the vast majority of the city, has the ability to require parking spaces for new development, or in the case of businesses, let's say a new business is moving into an existing commercial location, the city could take a look at their parking situation, kind of say, this is going to work, or no, this isn't going to work. But now within this half-a-mile radius of the Metrolink, this power has been removed from us. We still have some power in that way, in that we can require parking for hotels, uses similar to hotels, so motels, anything in that kind of range, and event centers. We also can still require disabled and electric vehicle parking, so that will remain a requirement. And the only qualifying location, again, is the train station, so it's a half a mile from that train station. So it's a little bit of a funny map. You might look at that and say, wait, the train station, that seems a lot bigger than the train station. Well, in doing our research on this, it's measured from the parcel lines, and the parcel is actually extremely long and skinny like that. So even though the platform is much smaller than that, we need to measure from the whole parcel, and that's why the area is so large. So it encompasses much of Old Town, the Ponderosa Shopping Center, and various residential and industrial areas. So just to give you a better feel, we toned in on these specific areas. So we have Old Town here. It cuts off, the radius cuts off right past the Topa Topa Brewing Company there, to give you a landmark. Similarly to the north along Lewis, it cuts out just past the Pleasant Valley School District Administrative Office. So that's up past El Tecolote there, and the Berry Street, or the former Stock Lumber site as well, but it's past that. To the east, it cuts off right past the Village at the Park YMCA there. And to the south, it cuts off basically at the city limits there, but just past the William Homes construction site in that industrial area adjacent. So a few things I just want to make note of for any members of the public online. We had a lot of phone calls about this, a lot of confusion about this. So a few things that this is not. This has nothing to do with people in RVs parking on your public streets. This has nothing to do with property owners governing who can park on their property. If there's someone just parking on your property, you still have the, whatever powers you had before to make them leave or tell them they're trespassing or whatever. This is really a power that the state has taken away from the city in terms of the half-a-mile radius to require most parking requirements. So that concludes my presentation. If there are any questions.
Just have one, is that parking requirements on just new development or on,
So it's new development, but let's say there was existing commercial and an old business left, and we'll give a specific example just to really sink our teeth into it. Let's say the old business was a retail store, and the new business is a restaurant. Well, our code says a restaurant requires more parking than a retail store. So maybe in a given situation, there was enough parking for a retail store, but under our rules, not enough parking for a restaurant. Whereas before, we could say to the restaurant, you know what, no, you can't move into that location or you can't operate there because there's not enough parking. Now we do not have the ability to do that, just within that half mile.
And James, I apologize if I may interject here. I just want to point out that this is new legislation that just became effective January of this year. And as I say that, I realize we're almost done with this year. But the long and short of it is that there is still no judicial interpretation of this code. And so how it affects the city could potentially change in the future. But based on, or piggybacking off of what Mr. Fowler said, I think that's a reasonable interpretation of the code.
is there any cases or litigation pending on
Not that
interpreting
we're-
this? Not yet?
Not that we're aware of, no.
I have one question.
Okay.
The blue line it's simply a 1/2 mile from the actual Metrolink property, is that right?
Yes, and the blue half line is from the parcel boundaries rather than I'll go back to the entirety so we can kind of see what I mean. It's a bit small there, my apologies, but the smaller red box there is the whole parcel. The parcel actually covers even some of the train tracks, but because that's the parcel, that's where we needed to measure from. And so that blue line is a 1/2 mile from the entire parcel, so that's why it's kind of a oval rather than a circle.
Okay, I see that. And then on the fringe parcels, the ones that are sort of close, and you might have that 25% of the area or more than 10% of the units apply, those would be taken probably on a case-by-case basis and...
Exactly. So we as staff would need to evaluate in a given development proposal what they're actually doing, and if they met the criteria to qualify for this exemption, well, they would get the exemption. If not, we would require parking. And one other thing to note, I didn't stress this enough, also to allay community fears for anyone watching, this doesn't mean developers in the vast majority of cases will not choose to put in parking. This now just means that rather than the city being controlling of the parking rules, the free market will guide it, for better or worse. So we don't anticipate developers putting in zero parking. We don't think that makes economic sense for them to do that. And indeed, we've had developments and little projects here and there within the 1/2 mile, and they're putting in parking, is what we've seen so far. So it's not, the sky isn't falling yet, but it's something we want the community to be mindful of.
Right. And I know it's just, on mine, reading through it, it's another thing, California's passed down to us, and some of their explanations that they put in here is what they were looking at, and from reducing vehicle miles traveled statewide, or comparing areas or like apartments or any place that doesn't require parking or doesn't have any parking places with those that do, and the percentage. Some of their rationale that they've put in there really doesn't make sense to me, and it doesn't apply to the majority of the cities and the majority of areas around. But I just want to put in my comments that it is something that's come down from California that we have to look at, but thankfully, I think that most of the developers will consider what they need for the project that they're putting in. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, and just to add to that, I appreciate you bringing these things to our attention. In our last hearing, we looked at the garage conversions, and that was also for informational purposes. And we want to know everything that, good, bad, or ugly, that is coming down the pipe, especially where the city's hand is being forced in the process. We can not be happy about that, but the best we can do is be informed about it. So thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you.
Thank you for your report. I'm just reading the bill right now, and it seems like there are a couple of exceptions there where the city can make findings supported by a preponderance of the evidence that without requiring parking, the city's ability to meet its share of housing needs would be impacted. And then two, there's an exception if a housing development project dedicates a minimum of 20% of units to very low or moderate income households, students, elderly, or persons with disabilities, or contains fewer than 20 housing units, or is subject to parking reductions based on any other applicable law. So just a couple of exceptions there, and I look forward to seeing how the city develops its own protocol to make these determinations.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they did have quite a list there of things to consider. But, so, I know I don't have any other questions or comments on this since it is discussion only and for informational purposes. And
We got some input from people in town on these emails,
that's
so those
right.
are going to be entered in the record as well, right? Yeah.
correct. Thank you for reminding me of that. We did get 2 email comments on this, both opposing the bill, but unfortunately, the bill is passed and we can't change the bill. So the best we can do is hope that developers in the area will do what they need to do to have their projects useful. So, and with that then, we can go to director's comments.
Yes, I have a short report. We will be canceling our October 17th meeting. We are trying to poll the commission right now to see if everyone's available for a meeting in November, but we haven't made the determination yet if we have secured a quorum yet. But we will be sending an email out to inform the commission before we, announce the meeting. And then if we do not have that meeting though, however, our next regular scheduled meeting will be December 5th.
When? December, you said?
December 5th.
Okay.
And we only have, that would be the last meeting of this calendar year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
What was the November date we were looking at?
November 7th.
7th, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Any other comments, questions? Okay, with this, we are adjourned.